What's up guys, Chris Schwartz-Edmisten here from Schwartz-Edmisten Web Design. In today's video, we're going to be going over this apple.com overflowing carousel, and we're going to be recreating it inside of Squarespace. And I'm going to be going over all of the CSS step by step in this video. Before we jump into the CSS, we need to do a little bit of setup to get the section ready. So what I did here is I added an auto layout carousel section. So if you go to add section and you go to people, they have this one down here where you can see it's like an overflow. So I've done a little bit more setup here. So if we edit the section, in the elements tab, you want to show the image, title, body, and button. And then in the content tab, I've added the little icon image here as a PNG, and then I have the title and description, and then I have the button and the button link wherever I want it to go to. And then in the design panel, this is where we need to do some of the setup. So I'm showing 4, just like in the example Apple site. So 4 columns. For the image crop, I'm doing 1 by 1. I don't want infinite scroll turned on because that's not how Apple does it. So I have that toggled off, but I do want to show the adjacent slides. So we definitely want that to be toggled on. And then for the style, set the item title and description and button size to whatever you want. These are the settings that I thought matched the Apple site the best. And then you want to toggle on card. That way we get the square box background. For the padding, I have it set to large. You can set it to whatever you want. And then for the navigation, I have the arrows toggled on, and I have them set to the bottom and aligned to the right. And that way they're, down here, just like the Apple site. So next, let's go to size and space. If I scroll up, I don't want them to be inset, so this will restrict the width to whatever your site max width is set to. I want them to go all the way across, so I'm setting it to full. For the media width, I have it cranked really far down, so the icons are pretty small and aligned to the left. Content width, we want to be large. For the space between elements, again, just kind of toggle these settings to whatever you think looks best. Space between slides, I have it set to small because in the Apple site, the gap is pretty small. And then for the vertical padding, so this is just the padding on the top and the bottom of the section, so you can set it to whatever you want to. And then for the position, we want to set this to stretch, so that's important. That way all the buttons will align at the bottom. So now that we have our section set up, we can go ahead and go to our custom CSS window and start writing the CSS. So we want to limit the custom CSS that we write to only this section because we don't necessarily want all the carousels on our site to inherit this styling. So I'm going to go to my custom CSS window. If you click in the left-hand panel and click /, that brings up the panel search, and you can type in CSS and then go straight to the custom CSS panel. So that's just a quick way to navigate between your panels. So I'm going to use the block identifier section identifier plugin to get the data section ID. Highly recommend downloading that plugin. It's super helpful. If you don't have it and you don't want to download it, you can right click and click inspect to bring up your Chrome inspect tools. And then if you right click on the section and scroll up to the outermost section container, and you'll identify it because it'll start with section. And as I hover over it, you can see this section on the page is being highlighted, so I know I'm hovering the right section. You can grab the data section ID here, and then you target data section IDs with brackets. So that's sort of another way to do what the plugin does. And the plugin also gets the element type of section, so you can add that beforehand, and now you're caught up to what I did with the extension. So now that we're targeting this one section, if you wanted this to apply to all carousel sections and not just this one section, what you could do is go to inspect and then target the user items list carousel class instead. So this would be your outermost selector, and now it'll apply to all carousels on the website. But again, I don't necessarily know that I want all carousels to have this styling. So that's why I'm making it specific just to this one section. So the first thing that we want to do, it really bugs me that the button doesn't line up with the items. And so if we right click on the section, we can go to the gutter, and for some reason, let's see. Here we go. It's the user items list carousel slides. So this container, so for some reason, it adds padding right of 40 pixels when the show adjacent slides is set to true. I'm not exactly sure why that is. So the padding is only added to this element on the right-hand side, but that causes the button not to align to the end of this item. And again, it just really bugs me. So I'm gonna copy this selector here and paste it inside of the curly brackets of our section, because again, we only want this to apply to this one section. I'm gonna give it a padding right of 0. Let me go ahead and, if you toggle the full screen and then go back down, it sort of like reshifts the items after you've made an adjustment. And so now we can see the arrow is aligned with this last item just by getting rid of that padding. Super strange choice by Squarespace. I'm not exactly sure why they're doing that, but that's how you can sort of overcome that weird issue. So next, if we go back to our inspect tools, inside of this slides container, we have each of the actual items, and each of the items get a class of list-item. And so I can target each item using this list item class, which I'm gonna do. And in CSS, we target classes with a period. So list item, I'll open up some curly brackets, and we're gonna give it a border radius of 20 pixels. So this is how you can do the rounded corners on the cards. So that's perfect. Next, we can get started on making the button span the whole item. So basically we want this card to be clickable. And so the way that we can do that is we need to target the button. And so I'm going to target the actual button itself, and we're gonna position it absolutely, and we're going to basically just make the button cover the whole entire card. So it's sort of like a little bit of a hack, a way to make the whole item clickable. So we're gonna give it a position absolute, and an inset of 0, meaning its top is going to be aligned to the top, the right to the right, the bottom to the bottom, and the left to the left. So that's what inset stands for. So now it covers the whole entire card, which is what we want. So next, we don't want it to have any sort of like button properties. So I'm going to go background, needs to be set to none. But I need to increase the specificity because Squarespace's styling is not being overridden. So let me go ahead and throw on an important tag. And now you can see our styling is overriding Squarespace's. So that's good. So we're not getting that like background color anymore. Next, I don't want it to have a border. So I'm going to go border none, and we'll throw on an important tag. And then for the color, let's do color transparent. Important. And the reason that I'm thinking that it's better to leave the text and set the color to transparent is because I believe screen readers will read the button. So if you want to have like descriptive button text that screen readers would read, then I think it makes sense just to make the button text transparent, but leave the button text. So that's how we're gonna sort of approach this situation. And so now if we tab onto these elements, you can see the outline is cut off because there's an overflow hidden on the parent container. So we don't want the outline to be outside of the element. We want it to be, hugging the element itself. And so what I can do is I can say when the button has a focus visible, I'm going to open up some curly brackets, and I'm going to change the outline offset to -2 pixels. And the reason that works is the outline offset, it brings the outline, which was 2 pixels away, it brings it in, offset in 2 pixels, and so then it just hugs the actual element itself. It's not outside the element. So that's what we're doing there. We're bringing the outline in, but let's go ahead and add a border radius equal to the same that's on the list item for the button. And that way, when the item is tabbed to. If someone is keyboard navigating, we get that rounded border radius that matches. So this is cool. So we're just making sure that this effect is also going to make sense for people navigating with a keyboard. So cool. So now this whole element is clickable. So whatever link you set up in the button settings, now like the whole card is clickable. The last thing we're going to do is this little plus icon in the corner, because that's going to be kind of like the most difficult. So I want to do the other things beforehand. So let's go ahead and tackle the arrows. The arrows are too big. I don't like that this arrow goes invisible when there's no more items over here. And we need to do some styling of the arrows. So let's tackle that next. So below the last curly bracket, still inside of our section curly bracket, we need to go ahead and target these arrows. So let me toggle forward and then click inspect so we can kind of see what's up with these arrows here. So as I toggle back and there's no more items here, the user items list carousel arrow button hidden class gets added. So when a button is hidden, it gets an opacity of 0. So basically they're just sort of visually hiding it. So instead of giving it an opacity of 0, what I'd rather do is copy this styling and we'll paste it here. So I'll get rid of the pointer events and we want the opacity to be not 0. So we can make it like 0.7, for example. That button will be disabled visually. So it'll still be there. It won't be hidden altogether, but it's disabled. So that's what we want to do, and it'll automatically do the same when the other button is disabled because the class that gets added is the same. Cool. So next we need to style these to make sure that they're much smaller. So I'm going to target the button, and we need to find the element on this button that controls the size. So if I kind of like go through the structure here, so we have all of our list items in this container, and I'll toggle that closed. Okay, so we have the gutter, and then we have the slideshow holder, and then below that we have the mobile arrows, which are hidden on desktop, and then we have the desktop arrows. So the desktop arrows down here inside of this container, we have the arrows bottom, which sort of, this structure happens when the arrows are set to be aligned to the bottom. The other setting is where you can have them overlay the items. So here we have 2 buttons inside of this arrows bottom container. The first one has a user items list carousel arrow button left, and then this one has the same thing but for the right. So these are our 2 buttons that we're dealing with, and it's this element. They both have the user items list carousel arrow button class, and they have a width and height of 60 pixels. So what I can do is I can just copy this class. I'll come down below, and we don't need anything because all these styles are already being applied by Squarespace. All we need to do is adjust these items, and I'll do 40 pixels instead. So now you can see our arrows are much smaller, but the next thing that I need to do is hide the kind of like horizontal line here, because we only want the caret part of the arrow. So inside of the SVG for this icon, it has 2 paths. So it has the like end arrow caret part, and then it has like the stick part. So we want to hide the stick. Now, there isn't any identifying class for these path elements. They both have user items list carousel arrow icon foreground, see, icon foreground, and then this one has arrow icon path. So they have the exact same classes. So the only way that we can select the stick is we can say in the SVG, we want to select the path that comes after a path. So we can do that by, we're going to be doing this to both desktop and mobile. So I'm going to reuse this class here. And inside of this button, I'm going to open up some curly brackets. And then we're going to say in the SVG, we want to select the path that comes after the path. And then we're going to give it a display of none. So now we've hidden the stick. And now we need to move over the carets. So the way that we can do that is we need to now target the actual like caret itself. So I can do that by saying svg, but we want to select the path that's the first child because we want to select the caret part now, the arrow tip. So I'm going to do path and then I'm going to say first child. So now we're selecting that caret part. And now I can go ahead and give it a transform, translate x of, I've just sort of played with it and I figured out that minus 30% works well. And then we can also change the stroke width of the paths if we wanted to, but I'll come back to that in a second. So here we have the user items carousel arrow button. This is applying to both of them. So this one is also being shifted over to the left. But we don't want to do that. We want to shift it to the right instead. And so that's where the kind of identifying class of whether the arrow button is on the right or left matters. So we want to select the left button. So I'm going to say we want to target the carousel arrow button. So here we have the button targeting. So inside of that closing curly bracket, I'm going to say we want to target the user items list carousel arrow button. And if it's the left one, I want to target the SVG path first child. And I want to do a transform translate X, but I want it to be positive 30%. So now we get that second arrow back where it should be. So it's very handy that they have this sort of identifying class on the buttons because then we can do something to a specific, like specifically the left or specifically the right button. Now I mentioned the stroke width for these carousels. So if you wanted them to be thicker, if we come to the path, you can see that by default, the stroke width for the icons is 2 pixels. So I can copy that and I can go to the path. And I can say, maybe this should be 3 pixels. And remember, this one is applying to both of the arrows. We're only overriding it for the left arrow down here. So anything that you do here will apply to both arrows. So that's why we can just add the stroke in this one place, change the stroke value, and it applies to both arrows. Now, I mentioned we also want this to be affecting mobile. So now that we have our desktop arrows set up, we also only want the carets on mobile. So what we need to do here now is target the mobile arrows. So if I go to inspect, so here we have the mobile arrows. So I can go ahead and use this selector to kind of also target the mobile arrow buttons. So here we're targeting the carousel arrow buttons for desktop. And if I want to target the mobile arrow buttons, you can see these two buttons here both have a class of mobile arrow button. So I'm going to add a comma and add that class in. Okay, so now all of this is applying, but again, we need to do something specific to this left-hand arrow. And on mobile, the left mobile arrow button gets a class of mobile arrow button left. So I'm going to copy that. And where we have this like specific override here, what I can do is add a comma. So we're going to say and paste in that class. And then we also want to target the SVG path first child. And there we go. So we get those carets on mobile as well as on desktop. Now for me, I don't want to change the stroke width, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that at 2 pixels. I think it looks better on both desktop and on mobile. Okay, so I've kind of like saved the hardest part for last here. So now we're going to be adding the icon. So we need to add like a black circle here, and then we need to add a plus icon. So how are we going to do that? Well, if I right click and inspect, so if I go to the list item content button wrapper, so it still exists down below here. And then we have the list item content button container. And this is the element that gets the margin top that spaces the content out from the content above it. And then we have our button, which is positioned absolutely. So how are we going to get a little icon down here in the bottom right hand corner? Well, because this element is the one that has the margin top on it, I'm going to go ahead and add it to the button container element. So let's find a logical place to put this. Let's just go ahead and arrow button. So this is all the button stuff. So since the container comes before the button, I'm going to paste in the CSS here. I like it when the curly bracket is on the same line. And now we can add an after pseudo element. So I'm going to go after, and now we can add some content into the page through the CSS. And you need the content property whenever you're using like a before or after pseudo element. If you get rid of the content property, then the element will disappear from the DOM. So it's no longer in there. You have to have the content property, even if you're not necessarily like putting content into the content property. So we're just using this after pseudo element to add a shape. So we'll do like a width of, let's say 30 pixels, a height of 30 pixels. I'll make the background black, and I'll do a border radius of 50%. That's going to make it a circle, and then we need to make sure it shows. So I'm going to do a display of block. Okay, cool. So now we have our circle. I think it's going to need to be bigger. It's hard to tell right now, but let me go ahead and make this maybe like 40 pixels. That way there's more room for the plus icon. I'm just going to go into what I was going to do before with the SVG icon. So I love Icon Monster. It has a bunch of free icons, so we can find a simple plus symbol. If you wanted to make your own, you could do that as well. I'm just going to go ahead and use this one. So we can embed this SVG, go to the URL encoder. So I've done a full tutorial on this before, but basically you paste in the SVG here. And one thing that I need to do is give it a fill of white. So I'm going to go #FFF, and now the crosshairs are white. And basically what it does is it encodes the SVG so you can use it in the CSS as a background image. So I have a tutorial showing how to put an SVG into a button, but this is using like pretty much the exact same technique. I can just add this background image to the after pseudo element. So I'm going to go to background size. Let's do 30 pixels and background repeat. We don't want it to repeat, so we're going to do no repeat. And I'm going to do background position center. Got to spell it right. And now we have our little icon, and we can size this however we wanted to. If we wanted it a little bit smaller, we could do that. So full control there over the icon size. So now we've added in our little plus sign. I want to make sure that it has a pointer events of none. And that way, the cursor can't like click on it, because we want our button to be the thing that people are clicking on. We want the whole card to be clickable. And so now we have our little plus icon, very similar to how Apple is doing it. Very cool. So maybe we want this to be a little bit smaller. Nice. And then you could find one that has a thicker stroke if you wanted to, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave that as is. Now on the Apple site, when you click an item, it adds a lightbox. And if you use the Lightbox Anything plugin, I'll link it in the description below this video. You can do the same thing. So you could load up a lightbox like this as well using that plugin. I've added a little bit of styling to add the rounded corners and the close icon to style it like that. But super cool plugin. It pulls in another page to be the lightbox. So you could set up a page for each of these cards and then just use the plugin to load in the lightbox when the card is clicked on. Super awesome plugin. I use this all the time on sites. So here we go. So that is our final CSS. So we've gotten rid of the padding right. We've added the border radius to the items. We've added our little icon here to the bottom right-hand corner. We've added, we've made our button span the full card, and that way the whole item is clickable. We've made sure that the button stays visible even when it's disabled. We've changed the button size, and then set up our button styling to have the arrow icon only be the little caret, and then we've done the same for mobile. So this is our mobile view. Very cool. And this is our desktop view. So there you go. That's how you can create the Apple Overflow carousel inside of Squarespace with just a bit of CSS. All right, that's it for this video. If you're interested in grabbing the CSS, it's linked in the description below. If you want to grab the Lightbox Anything plugin, that's also in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to be notified for more Squarespace customization content like this. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.